The dining room smelled of roasted sage, melted butter, and quiet hostility. It was Thanksgiving dinner. I sat near the foot of the long mahogany table, staring at the empty crystal wine glass near my right hand. My stepmother Valerie was making her rounds. She held a bottle of vintage Cabernet, the dark liquid swirling gracefully as she poured a generous measure into my father Richard's glass. She moved to my younger half-sister Savannah, filling her glass to the brim. Savannah did not even look up from her phone, her thumbs flying rapidly across the illuminated screen. When Valerie reached my seat, she paused. For a fraction of a second, her cold eyes met mine. Then she lifted the bottle, offered a tight, bloodless smile to the wall behind my head, and stepped right past me to fill the glass of Savannah's fiancé, Preston. Not a single drop for me. I did not ask for any. I just let my hands rest in my lap, feeling the familiar, freezing reality of being a ghost in my own home. At the head of the table, Richard pushed his chair back. The wood scraped sharply against the floorboards. He picked up a silver butter knife and tapped it against his flute. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said. His voice carried the same practiced corporate cadence he used in boardrooms. "I want to make a toast. We have a lot to be thankful for this year, but more importantly, we have a legacy to secure." Savannah finally set her phone face down. She sat up straighter, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "I have spent decades building our marketing firm into an empire," Richard continued, his chest puffing out. "It takes a certain kind of mind to handle wealth." He let his gaze drift down the table. It bypassed Valerie, skipped over Preston, and landed squarely on me. The residual holiday warmth drained from his face. "Effective immediately, I am transferring the firm, the $4 million estate, and all holding accounts solely to Savannah." He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table. "You are just an employee, Juliette. You lack the drive for our world. Let us be honest, you were never really part of this family anyway." Savannah let out a soft, mocking laugh. Valerie took a slow sip of her wine, watching me over the rim of her glass, waiting for the tears. I gave them nothing. "My name is Juliette Silas, and I am 27 years old." Instead of crying, my right hand slipped into the pocket of my blazer. My thumb found the textured groove of the small recording pen resting there. I pressed the button. I captured every single word. What Richard did not know was that he did not own a single brick of that house or a single share of that company. My biological mother did. And the manila envelope my lawyer delivered to them exactly 3 weeks later held the proof. When they opened it, Savannah fainted on the hardwood floor. Before I tell you exactly what was in that envelope and how I took back my empire, welcome to Sophia Told Stories. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your age, your location, and your local time in the comments. I want to know who you are and where you are right now. Now, let me take you back 6 months before that dinner, to a cramped studio apartment, a stack of tax returns, and the night I realized my entire life was a financial lie. 6 months before that Thanksgiving dinner, my life looked very different. It was mid-May. I sat at a scratched laminate table in my 400-square-foot studio apartment. The air conditioning unit rattled in the window, struggling to cut through the sweltering city heat. My laptop screen cast a harsh blue glow across a stack of final loan envelopes from my student loan servicer. I was drowning in $80,000 of debt from my accounting degree. Every paycheck I earned as a junior CPA went straight into the black hole of interest rates. I opened my phone and tapped an app. Savannah had just posted a new video. She was sitting in the back of a black car holding up a pair of red bottom heels. She smiled into the camera, thanking our father for her early weekend treat. Savannah was 24 years old and called herself a lifestyle creator. She had never held a real job. She had never paid a utility bill. Richard funded her entire existence, from her luxury apartment downtown to her monthly esthetician appointments. I closed the app, the screen turning black. My chest tightened. I did not want designer shoes. I just wanted a chance to breathe. The next morning, I walked into Richard's corner office at the marketing firm. The room smelled of expensive leather and citrus cologne. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline. He sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk, reviewing a quarterly report. He did not look up when I entered. I stood in front of his desk, my hands clammy. I held a single manila folder containing a refinancing application. My current loan interest rates were predatory, hovering near 12%. If Richard simply co-signed a new consolidation loan, my rate would drop to 3%. It would save me hundreds of dollars a month. It would cost him nothing but a signature. I placed the folder carefully on his desk. He glanced at it, then up at me, his expression flat. I explained the math, my voice steady, laying out the exact financial benefit. I showed him how I had never missed a payment. I just needed the leverage of his credit score to escape the cycle. Richard picked up a gold pen, turning it between his fingers. He pushed the folder back toward me. The paper slid across the polished wood, stopping inches from my hand. "No," he said. I blinked, the rejection landing like a physical blow. I asked him why. "You need to learn the value of $1, Juliet," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I built this empire with my bare hands." I did not ask for handouts. Savannah has the mind for wealth. She understands branding and perception. You are an accountant. You play it safe. You need to earn your keep and build your own credit. Bailing you out teaches you nothing. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my car. He was lecturing me about the value of $1 while funding his youngest daughter's luxury shopping sprees. Before I could form a response, he reached under his desk and pulled out 2 heavy cardboard boxes. He dropped them onto the floor with a loud thud. "Since you are here, take these," he ordered. "It is the raw data for the firm's annual tax filing. My private accountant wants too much to handle the overflow this year. Do it on your own time. Consider it a learning opportunity." He was making me do his corporate taxes for free. I stared at the boxes, the injustice burning in my throat. I picked them up, the cardboard biting into my fingers, and walked out without another word. 2 days later, my stepmother Valerie hosted a Sunday brunch at the family estate. I arrived wearing my best work dress, which was 4 years old and fraying slightly at the hem. I took a seat near the edge of the patio, sipping a glass of iced water. Valerie was holding court near the pool, laughing with her friends. Then Savannah walked outside. The conversation stopped. Savannah wore a flowing silk sundress, her hair styled in loose, effortless waves. But it was not the dress that caught my attention. It was the jewelry resting against her collarbone. A heavy gold chain holding a vibrant square-cut emerald surrounded by a halo of crushed diamonds. The air vanished from my lungs. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew that necklace. I had memorized every facet of that stone from old photographs. It belonged to my biological mother. She died when I was 2 years old. That necklace was the only tangible piece of her I had ever truly wanted. Richard had always told me it was locked away in a safe deposit box until I was older. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the stone patio. GK walked straight toward Savannah. My eyes were locked on the green stone. She noticed my stare and touched the pendant, offering a bright, oblivious smile. "Do you like it?" Savannah asked. "Mom let me wear it for my upcoming brand shoot. She says it brings out my eyes." I turned my gaze to Valerie. She was watching me, her expression a mask of polite innocence. I asked Valerie what Savannah was doing wearing my mother's jewelry. My voice trembled, betraying the raw ache in my chest. Valerie stepped forward, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her linen skirt. Her tone was sweet, dripping with a condescension that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Juliet, do not make a scene," Valerie murmured, stepping close enough that I could smell her heavy floral perfume. "Your father and I agreed the piece should see the light of day. Savannah is attending a very high-profile gala next week. Let us be realistic, dear. You spend your days hunched over spreadsheets. You simply do not have the wardrobe or the lifestyle to pull off a piece like this. It would be wasted on you. Wasted on me. My own mother's legacy." Savannah shrugged, sipping her mimosa, already bored of the tension. I stared at the emerald gleaming in the sunlight. A hot, stinging shame crept up my neck, rapidly followed by a cold, unforgiving rage. I did not yell. I did not cry. I turned around and walked out of the house. I drove back to my tiny, sweltering apartment with a singular thought repeating in my mind. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was weak. I sat down at my scratched laminate table. The 2 heavy boxes of Richard's corporate tax files sat in the corner. I had planned to delay the work, but the anger inside me demanded an outlet. I ripped open the tape on the first box and pulled out the stacks of paper. I booted up my laptop. If Richard wanted me to earn my keep by saving him accounting fees, I would audit every single page. Hours ticked by. The sun set, casting long shadows across my small room. I entered data, cross-referencing receipts and expense reports. At 2 a.m, my eyes were burning. I was reviewing the tax forms for the firm's primary holding company. Something caught my eye. I paused, my finger hovering over the mouse pad. I pulled up the previous year's return and placed it next to the current data. The numbers did not make sense. Richard had always claimed he was the sole founder and primary shareholder of the marketing firm, operating it as a standard business entity. But the ownership distribution percentages on the federal forms were routed through a secondary blind trust. The taxpayer identification numbers did not match Richard's personal or corporate umbrella accounts. He was not the owner. He was a trustee. My pulse quickened. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a sharp electric clarity. I logged into the firm's secure back-end server, using the administrative credentials Richard had carelessly provided me to do the taxes. I started digging. I bypassed the standard payroll and expense folders, searching for the root directory of the holding company. Deep within the server architecture, hidden beneath layers of archived client data, I found a restricted folder labeled simply with my biological mother's initials. GDK was locked. I stared at the glowing folder icon. I knew my mother's birthday. I knew her anniversary with Richard. I tried GDK. Access denied. I thought about the emerald necklace. I thought about the year she died. I typed the 4 digits of the year of her death. The screen flashed. A green progress bar appeared. Access granted. The folder opened, revealing dozens of scanned legal documents. My eyes scanned the file names, property deeds, stock certificates, and one large file titled Irrevocable Trust Agreement. I clicked the file. The document loaded on my screen, revealing a signature I had never seen in person, but knew instantly in my heart. What I read on that first page shattered every lie my father ever told, and it set the stage for a war he had no idea he was fighting. The glow of my laptop screen at home only offered a fraction of the truth. The restricted folder I unlocked contained network shortcuts, encrypted files that demanded a direct connection to the firm's local server. I could not open them from my apartment. The firewall was too sophisticated. To see the actual documents, I had to physically sit at a terminal inside the downtown office suite. The next evening, I waited until 8 o'clock. I sat at my cramped desk in the bullpen, pretending to cross-reference the standard tax deductions, while the rest of the staff filtered out. The cleaning crew finished their rounds by 9. The heavy glass doors locked. The suite fell silent, save for the low hum of the centralized air conditioning and the faint street noise 50 stories below. I moved from my small cubicle into Richard's expansive corner office. The room felt different in the dark. The expensive leather furniture and polished mahogany desk no longer looked like symbols of hard work. They looked like stolen goods. I sat in his ergonomic chair, my hands hovering over his keyboard. I woke his primary monitor. Using the administrative credentials he handed over so carelessly, I bypassed the initial security protocol. I navigated back to the hidden directory, the one secured with the year my biological mother died. I typed the 4 digits. The server authenticated the request. The real folder opened. Dozens of high-resolution PDF files populated the screen. I ignored the subfolders labeled Offshore Routing and focused on the core document. The file was titled Irrevocable Trust Agreement. My pulse thrummed against my throat as I double-clicked the icon. A 40-page legal document loaded. The header bore the insignia of a prestigious estate law firm. I scrolled past the dense boilerplate language, my eyes scanning the heavily structured text until I reached the primary declarations. The words on the screen dismantled 27 years of manufactured reality. Richard did not own the marketing firm. He never had. My biological mother, Elise, was the sole founder and primary shareholder. She built the client roster. She secured the initial venture capital. Richard was just a mid-level account manager she married a few years before she fell ill. When Elise knew she was dying, she drafted this trust to protect her legacy. She left the $4 million family estate, the liquid assets, and 100% of the firm's equity to one person, me. I was the sole beneficiary. Richard was merely named as the executor, a legal guardian appointed to manage the holding accounts until I came of age. I read the termination clause 3 times to ensure my eyes were not betraying me. The trust stipulated that the executor's control would automatically dissolve, transferring full, uncontested ownership to Juliet Silas upon her 28th birthday. My 28th birthday was in December, just 1 month away. I sat back in the leather chair, the air rushing out of my lungs. Every cruel comment Richard ever made echoed in my mind. He always told me I lacked the drive for wealth. He constantly bragged about building his empire from the ground up. He refused to co-sign a simple loan to help me escape debt, lecturing me about the value of $1 while forcing me to audit the very company I legally owned. I was drowning in student loans, living in a cramped studio, eating cheap noodles, while he funded Savannah's luxury lifestyle using my money. My mother tried to protect me. She left me an empire, and my father spent my entire life convincing me I was a burden. A cold, rigid focus replaced the shock. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. If the trust automatically transferred to me in 30 days, Richard was running out of time. He had to be planning something. He would never willingly hand over the keys to the kingdom. I exited the trust document and began scouring the subfolders. I found a directory created just 2 weeks prior titled Asset Reallocation 2024. I opened the first file. It was a property transfer deed for the family estate. The legal language outlined a formal transfer of the property title from the trust into a newly formed limited liability company. I checked the ownership structure of that new LLC. The sole proprietors were Valerie and Savannah. Richard was attempting to drain the trust before the December deadline. He was restructuring the assets, burying them under shell companies, so that by the time I turned 28, the trust would be an empty shell. But transferring assets out of an irrevocable trust required the explicit written consent of the primary beneficiary. I scrolled to the final page of the warranty deed. There, resting on the signature line, was my name, Juliet Silas. I stared at the looping letters. The curve of the J was slightly too wide. The slant of the S was too rigid. It was a highly practiced forgery. My own father had actively committed federal fraud, falsifying my signature to steal my birthright and hand it over to the daughter he preferred. The sheer audacity of the crime made my stomach turn. He was not just a terrible father, he was a felon. I needed this evidence. Without it, I was just a junior accountant making wild accusations against a prominent business owner. I minimized the window and opened a secure, encrypted browser. I logged into a private Proton Mail account I used for sensitive client communications. My hands shook as I dragged the PDF files into the attachment field. The trust agreement, the forged property deed, the hidden tax ledgers showing the diverted funds. The files were large, packed with high-resolution legal scans. A blue progress bar appeared on the screen, crawling at an agonizingly slow pace. 10%, 20%. I checked the time on the bottom corner of the monitor. It was 10:15. The quiet hum of the office was suddenly broken by a sharp, mechanical chime. The elevator out in the main lobby had just arrived at our floor. I froze. My eyes darted to the frosted glass wall of the corner office. The heavy suite doors opened, the magnetic lock disengaging with a loud clack. Heavy, familiar footsteps hit the carpeted hallway. Richard. He was supposed to be at a charity dinner with Valerie. Why was he back at the office? The blue upload bar inched forward. 60%. 70%. The footsteps grew louder, moving deliberately past the reception desk and down the main corridor. He was heading straight for his office. I could hear the faint jingle of his keys. I needed the upload to finish. If I canceled it now, the encrypted files might corrupt, and I would leave a digital footprint on his local machine. 80%. 90%. Juliette! Richard's voice boomed through the dark suite, carrying a sharp edge of suspicion. What are you still doing here? I could see his shadow expanding against the frosted glass. He was 10 feet away. 5 feet. The progress bar hit 100%. The email sent. I instantly slammed the browser window shut, pulling up the standard tax spreadsheet I had been working on earlier. I yanked the physical Ethernet cable free from the docking station, severing the connection to the restricted local server, just as the brass door handle turned. The door swung open. The harsh fluorescent hallway light spilled into the dark office, illuminating my face. Richard stood in the doorway, his custom suit perfectly pressed, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He looked at the glowing monitor, then down at my trembling hands resting on his keyboard. "What exactly are you doing on my computer?" he demanded, stepping into the room. I had a fraction of a second to formulate a lie that would save my life. I forced my lungs to draw a slow breath. I kept my hands resting lightly on the keyboard, making sure my fingers did not tremble. I pointed to the glowing monitor displaying the complex grid of numbers. I told him the primary server denied my access credentials from the bullpen terminal. I explained I needed to cross-verify the depreciation schedules for the firm's commercial real estate holdings, and his desktop was the only machine with the proper administrative clearance. He stepped deeper into the room. His shadow fell over me, cold and imposing. He inspected the screen. The mundane tax spreadsheet sat there, perfectly innocent, hiding the digital theft I had just completed. I held my breath, waiting for him to notice the encrypted browser running in the background. He let out a sharp sigh of annoyance. He bought the lie. His ego could not fathom a reality where I possessed the intelligence to outsmart him. To Richard, I was just a desperate junior accountant trying to keep her job. He straightened his expensive silk tie. He told me I lacked professional boundaries. He reminded me I was merely an employee, a subordinate who should be endlessly grateful he provided me with a paycheck at all. He stated most firms would terminate someone instantly for sitting at the chief executive desk without explicit permission. He paced in front of the window, lecturing me about corporate hierarchy and respect. I nodded submissively. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I knew if I showed a single ounce of defiance tonight, he would lock down the network. If I confronted him about the forged signature right then, he would accelerate the transfer. He would move the $4 million estate into an offshore account by tomorrow morning, burying the assets under so much international red tape I would never see a single dime. I had to play the obedient, pathetic daughter. I had to let him believe he held absolute power. Richard stopped pacing. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He extracted a crumpled piece of thermal paper and tossed it onto the mahogany desk. It landed right next to my hand. I smoothed out the creased edges. It was a retail receipt from a high-end boutique on Fifth Avenue. The total was $4,500. The item listed was a designer leather handbag. The purchase date was yesterday afternoon. Savannah had posted a picture of that exact bag on her social media feed this morning, bragging about her fabulous lifestyle. "Categorize this under corporate marketing expenses," he ordered. "Put it down as a client retention gift for the upcoming charity gala." It was blatant tax fraud. He was using company funds to finance my sister's vanity, then forcing me to falsify federal documents to hide the paper trail. This was how he operated. He drained the resources my biological mother built, funneling the wealth to his new family and making me do the dirty work to cover his tracks. I picked up the receipt. I folded it neatly along the original crease. I looked up at him with a blank expression. I told him I would handle the categorization immediately. He offered a curt nod, satisfied with my total submission. He turned and walked out of the office. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind him, the magnetic lock engaging with a solid click. I sat in the silent room, gripping the small piece of thermal paper until my knuckles turned white. I slipped the receipt into my blazer pocket. It was another piece of physical evidence. Another nail in his eventual coffin. I gathered my belongings, packed my laptop into my worn canvas tote bag, and left the building. The city's streets were wet from a recent rainstorm. Neon signs reflected in the dark puddles scattered across the asphalt. I walked to my rusted sedan and climbed inside. The engine sputtered a few times before roaring to life, a stark contrast to the quiet purr of the luxury vehicles parked in my father's driveway. I drove back to my tiny apartment, my mind racing with legal strategies. I sat on my faded couch and opened my banking application. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a harsh light on my reality. My checking account balance was in the negative. I had overdrawn my funds, paying the minimum balance on my student loans earlier that week. I possessed the digital files proving a multi-million-dollar federal crime, but I lacked the capital to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a legal defense team. The irony was suffocating. On paper, I was a millionaire. I owned a lucrative marketing firm and a sprawling estate. In reality, I was 27 years old, starving, and staring at a negative bank balance. I knew I needed a lawyer. Not just any attorney, but a predator. Someone who could tear through Richard's corporate shields and dismantle his fraudulent holding companies. I opened a search engine on my laptop. I bypassed the standard family law practitioners and local civil advocates. I needed someone who specialized in hostile corporate takeovers, complex asset recovery, and contested irrevocable trusts. I spent 3 hours reading court transcripts, financial news articles, and legal journals. I searched for the most aggressive litigators in the state. One name kept appearing in the most brutal, high-stakes financial litigation cases: Harper Davis. She was a senior partner at a ruthless downtown firm. The financial press referred to her as an apex predator in a tailored skirt suit. She did not negotiate settlements. She annihilated her opposition in the courtroom. She specialized in dismantling corrupt executives and recovering stolen corporate assets. Reading her case history sent a shiver down my spine. She was exactly the kind of monster I needed to unleash upon my father. There was only one massive barrier. Lawyers of her caliber demanded six-figure retainers up front before they even answered a phone call. I had nothing but a negative bank balance and a flash drive full of encrypted evidence. I could not afford her hourly rate for even 5 minutes of her time. My only option was to convince her to take the case on contingency. I had to prove the payout would be so guaranteed and so substantial that she would risk her own firm's resources to fight my battle. I drafted an email to her private consultation address. I spent an hour refining every single sentence. I did not mention my father's name or the specific company. I simply stated I possessed undeniable proof of a $4 million estate fraud. I outlined the existence of an irrevocable trust, a forged beneficiary signature on a property transfer deed, and documented tax evasion. I promised a clean paper trail and a slam-dunk federal case. I requested a secret meeting. I read the email 5 times. It was short, cold, and strictly business. It was the perfect bait for a legal shark. I pressed send at 4 a.m. The digital swoosh sound echoed in my quiet apartment. I closed my laptop and laid down on my narrow bed. I stared at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the distant wail of a police siren. I was playing a very dangerous game. If Harper Davis rejected my case, I had no backup plan. I could not approach a cheaper lawyer, they would be crushed by Richard's expensive legal team. I was betting my entire future, my mother's legacy, and my own freedom on the hope that a legendary attorney would smell the blood in the water and agree to meet with a broke accountant. The sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light through my thin curtains. I did not sleep. I just waited for the notification tone on my phone, praying my digital arsenal was enough to secure the ultimate weapon. The elevator carried me up 50 floors to the apex of the downtown financial district. My ears popped as the polished steel doors slid open. Harper Davis operated her law firm out of a glass penthouse overlooking the sprawling city. I walked across the imported marble lobby wearing my only tailored suit. The fabric smelled faintly of cheap dry cleaning solvent. The receptionist did not ask for my name. She simply nodded and guided me down a quiet corridor into a corner conference room. Harper sat at the head of a long oak table. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and a sharp navy blazer. She possessed the calculated stillness of a predatory cat. She did not offer me a glass of water. She omitted pleasantries entirely. She gestured to the empty leather chair opposite her position. I sat down, placing my faded canvas tote bag onto the expensive wood surface. I unzipped the main compartment and retrieved the thick stack of printed documents. I laid out the digital evidence I had stolen from the restricted corporate server. I presented the irrevocable trust agreement first. I followed it with the forged property transfer deed. I placed the hidden tax ledgers on the right side of the table. Harper retrieved a pair of silver reading glasses from her pocket. She slid them onto her face and began reviewing the paperwork. For 20 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp rustle of turning pages. I watched her face, searching for a reaction. Her expression remained neutral. She read the clauses, scrutinized the financial routing numbers, and examined the forged signature on the warranty deed. Finally, she removed her glasses and set them down. "You are a junior certified public accountant," she stated. Her voice was cool, measured, carrying a sharp edge of authority. I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap to hide my trembling fingers. She tapped the forged document with a manicured nail. "Your father is Richard Silas. He operates a boutique firm generating 7 figures in annual revenue. He resides in a $4 million estate. According to this original trust, your biological mother left every single asset to you. The executor control legally bypasses his authority on your 28th birthday next month." I confirmed her summary. I laid my financial reality bare. I told her my checking account was currently overdrawn. I explained I could not afford a standard retainer fee. I needed a litigator willing to hunt for a percentage of the kill. Harper offered a small, terrifying smile. It was the look of a veteran hunter observing a prime target. She told me she typically required $50,000 just to open a new client file. However, the sheer arrogance of Richard's federal crimes intrigued her. The paper trail was pristine. The forgery was brazen. She agreed to take the litigation on contingency. She requested 30% of the recovered liquid assets upon a successful settlement or verdict. I agreed instantly. Giving up 30% of a recovered empire was an incredible victory compared to retaining 100% of nothing. I felt a sudden rush of triumph. I had secured the ultimate weapon to destroy my father's lies. But Harper raised her hand, halting my internal celebration. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the oak table. "Wealthy men rarely surrender without a brutal fight," she warned. "Richard will hire an army of defense attorneys. They will employ the oldest trick in the corporate playbook. They will blame the staff." I frowned, asking her to clarify. Harper explained that when rich executives are caught stealing, they claim ignorance. Richard would testify that the forged signature and the diverted funds were merely clerical mistakes made by his accounting department. He would state under oath that he signed a tall stack of routine BK print, and because I was an employee working inside that very department, his lawyers would spin the narrative against me. They would paint me as an incompetent accountant who made a filing error, or worse, a vindictive daughter trying to frame a hardworking father. To secure a criminal indictment and guarantee the asset recovery, we needed something the printed documents could not provide. We needed undeniable proof of his intent. We needed Richard acknowledging his deliberate plot to defraud the rightful heir. I asked her how a broke junior accountant was supposed to extract a federal confession from a paranoid millionaire. Harper opened the center drawer of her desk. She retrieved a sleek black object and slid it across the smooth wood. It was a pen, a standard, cheap-looking ballpoint pen. It looked identical to the dozens of basic writing instruments I kept in my cubicle at the marketing firm. I picked it up. It felt slightly heavier than a normal pen, the weight concentrated near the top. Harper instructed me to twist the silver cap. I turned the metal piece. A microscopic green light flashed near the pocket clip, illuminating for just a fraction of a second before turning dark again. It was a high-capacity, voice-activated audio recorder. Harper told me narcissistic men loved the sound of their own voices. They believed they were untouchable, especially within the walls of their own castles. She advised me to keep the device in my pocket at all times. She specifically focused on the upcoming holiday season. Families gather, egos inflate, expensive wine flows, arrogance reaches a boiling point. She promised me Richard would eventually brag about his brilliant financial maneuvering. He would want an audience to witness his cleverness. When he opened his mouth, I had to be ready to capture every single syllable. I clicked the pen off. I placed it carefully into the inner pocket of my blazer. I felt the cold metal resting against my ribs. It felt like holding a loaded firearm. I stood up, shook her hand, and walked out of the skyscraper. The city air tasted different on my tongue. For the first time in my entire existence, I did not feel like a helpless victim trapped in a cycle of debt. I felt dangerous. I owned a $4 million estate. I owned a marketing empire. My father was merely a squatter, living on borrowed time. I walked toward the subway station, my mind racing with strategies on how to corner Richard into a confession. My newfound power was intoxicating. I felt untouchable. But reality possesses a brutal way of dragging you back to the present. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out, unlocking the screen. A new notification flashed in the family GK chat. It was a message from Savannah. I opened the text thread. Savannah demanded I arrive at the estate by 6 in the morning on Thursday. Thursday was Thanksgiving. Her message lacked any form of greeting. She bluntly stated Valerie's luxury catering company had unexpectedly canceled their contract due to a scheduling conflict. Savannah complained she could not possibly be expected to ruin her fresh manicure preparing a turkey. She ordered me to cook the entire holiday meal for 20 guests. Her closing sentence was a masterclass in casual cruelty. She wrote, "You need to do this because you do not have anything better to do with your life anyway." I stopped walking. I stood on the crowded sidewalk, pedestrians rushing past me in a blur of motion. I stared at the glowing screen. My younger sister was ordering me to act as a private chef inside the very house I legally owned. I slid the phone back into my purse. I touched the recording pen hidden inside my blazer. A cold, quiet determination settled deep in my chest. I would bake the turkey. I would serve the wine. I would smile and play the perfect servant. Because Thursday was going to be the last meal they ever ate in my home. Thursday morning arrived with a biting frost that clung to the windshield of my rusted sedan. I navigated the winding suburban roads toward the affluent northern district, the heater in my car struggling to combat the November chill. I turned onto the private drive leading to the family estate. The wrought iron gates stood wide open, welcoming a steady stream of luxury vehicles. I parked my car near the edge of the gravel turnaround, deliberately keeping it hidden behind a tall row of manicured cedar hedges. I sat behind the steering wheel for a long moment, staring at the imposing brick facade of the multi-million-dollar property. For my entire life, this structure represented my exclusion. It was a fortress where my father and stepmother ruled, a place where I was merely a tolerated guest. But today, the architecture looked different to me. I looked at the grand bay windows, the slate roof, and the sweeping front porch. I knew the secret history of those bricks. My biological mother designed that porch. She selected that slate. I was not a guest pulling up to a wealthy relative's home. I was the rightful owner, arriving at her own property. I grabbed my faded canvas tote bag, stepped into the freezing air, and walked through the heavy oak front door. The house was already buzzing with chaotic energy. The scent of roasted garlic, melting butter, and expensive floral arrangements filled the grand foyer. I did not bother taking off my coat before a sharp voice echoed from the end of the hallway. Savannah stood in the arched doorway of the chef's kitchen. She wore a pristine white silk blouse, tailored linen trousers, and towering designer heels. It was an outfit meant for a magazine editorial, not a functioning kitchen. She held a crystal flute of sparkling wine, tapping her manicured fingernails against the delicate glass. "You are 40 minutes late," Savannah announced, her tone dripping with intense irritation. "The cranberry reduction needs to be started, the root vegetables are not peeled, and you have not even touched the hors d'oeuvres. Hurry up and wash your hands." I did not offer an apology. I simply removed my coat, draped it over a hall chair, and walked past her into the sprawling kitchen. Preston Sterling leaned against the central marble island. Savannah had been dating Preston for nearly 2 years. He was the heir to a lucrative commercial logistics empire, a man who possessed generational wealth and a deep-seated disdain for anyone who actually worked for a living. He wore a cashmere sweater draped casually over his shoulders. He watched me tie a stained canvas apron around my waist with an expression of profound boredom, treating me with the exact same level of indifferent dismissal he reserved for valet drivers and waitstaff. Savannah glided over to Preston, wrapping her free arm around his waist. She tilted her head, ensuring her glossy hair caught the recessed lighting. "Just ignore her mood," Savannah stage whispered to Preston, making sure her voice was loud enough to carry across the room. "Juliet is just bitter because she has to spend her holiday covered in grease, while the rest of us actually celebrate." I picked up a paring knife and began stripping the rough skin from a mountain of potatoes. I focused on the rhythmic motion of the blade, keeping my expression entirely neutral. I needed to remain invisible. I needed them to feel secure in their assumed superiority. Preston chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink. He asked Savannah what time her father planned to make the official announcement. The question made my hands freeze for a fraction of a second. I kept my eyes focused on the cutting board, listening intently. Right before the main course, Savannah replied, her voice breathless with anticipation. "Daddy told me last night. He is officially stepping down from the daily operations. He is transferring the executive voting rights to me tonight. I am going to be the chief executive officer by dessert." Preston kissed her temple, murmuring his approval. He praised her business acumen, congratulating her on securing the family legacy. The sheer delusion of their conversation was staggering. Savannah possessed zero corporate experience. She had never balanced a ledger, negotiated a contract, or managed a single employee. Her entire existence was funded by the marketing firm my biological mother built from nothing. Now Richard was handing over a company he did not own to a daughter who did not earn it, all while the true heir stood 10 feet away, peeling their vegetables. I gripped the handle of the paring knife, my knuckles turning white. I forced myself to resume chopping. The blade hit the wooden block with sharp, rhythmic thuds. Let them brag, I told myself. Let them inflate their egos until the pressure shatters the glass. The morning dragged into the early afternoon. The kitchen transformed into a sweltering furnace. I moved frantically between the 6-burner gas stove and the dual commercial ovens, managing a dozen different complex recipes, while Savannah and Preston stood safely out of the way, offering unsolicited critiques on my plating techniques. By 4 o'clock, the main event was ready. A 20-pound turkey roasted inside the lower oven, the skin blistering to a perfect golden brown. The timer shrieked, slicing through the ambient noise of the house. "Pull that out before it dries out," Savannah ordered, pointing a manicured finger toward the stove. Preston's parents are arriving in 10 minutes, and the kitchen smells like an abattoir. I grabbed a pair of thick, quilted, insulated mitts. I bent down and pulled open the heavy stainless steel door of the commercial oven. A suffocating wave of intense, blistering heat washed over my face. I reached inside, gripping the handles of the wide cast-iron roasting pan. The bird was incredibly heavy. Hot oil and melted butter pooled at the bottom of the dark metal pan, bubbling furiously. I braced my core, pulling the massive weight forward, sliding the pan along the metal oven rack. Just as the pan cleared the edge of the rack, my left foot slipped on a slick patch of spilled olive oil, resting unseen on the floor tiles. My balance shifted abruptly. The heavy roasting pan dipped forward. I strained to correct the angle, but the sudden movement caused a wave of boiling grease to surge over the shallow lip of the cast iron. The scalding liquid splashed directly onto my exposed left forearm. A sharp, brilliant flash of pure agony tore through my skin. I gasped, my teeth grinding together to trap a scream in my throat. The sudden pain caused my grip to falter. My right hand jerked, knocking a heavy silicone basting brush off the adjacent counter. The brush hit the floor, splattering a dark crimson trail of cranberry glaze across the pristine white marble tiles. I managed to slam the heavy roasting pan onto the stovetop before dropping to my knees. I clutched my left wrist. The skin on my forearm was already turning a furious, angry shade of scarlet. The searing pain radiated up to my shoulder, stealing the breath from my lungs. "Oh, are you kidding me?" Savannah groaned. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting at least a fraction of human decency. A simple question asking if I was injured. A damp towel. Anything. Instead, Savannah let out a dramatic sigh of total disgust. She looked down at the drops of cranberry glaze staining the white marble floor. "Juliette, look at this mess," Savannah complained, her tone sharp and accusatory. Preston's mother is highly sensitive to clutter. "You are ruining the entire aesthetic of the kitchen. Clean that up immediately before someone slips." She did not even glance at the angry red burn wrapping around my arm. She merely adjusted her grip on her champagne flute, stepped gracefully over the spilled glaze in her expensive designer heels, and guided Preston out of the kitchen toward the grand foyer to greet their arriving guests. I knelt alone on the floor. The physical agony in my arm was blinding, but the emotional clarity it provided was profound. This was who they were. This was how they viewed me. I was not a sister. I was not a daughter. I was an appliance. I slowly stood up, my legs trembling. I walked over to the deep farmhouse sink and turned the heavy brass faucet. I thrust my injured arm under the freezing stream of tap water. The icy shock bit into the burn, offering a sharp, stinging relief. I watched the water run over the rising blisters, washing away the grease. I reached my dry right hand into the inner pocket of my stained blazer. My fingers brushed against the sleek, cold metal of the recording pen Harper Davis had given me. The texture of the pen anchored me. The searing pain in my flesh faded into the background, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I turned off the faucet. I wrapped a clean cotton towel around my blistering arm, hiding the injury beneath the dark fabric of my sleeve. Over the next 2 hours, the grand estate filled with wealthy guests. The air vibrated with the sound of clinking glasses, forced laughter, and loud, boastful conversations. I carried heavy silver platters of food into the formal dining room, moving silently around the perimeter while the guests took their designated seats. Valerie directed the service with sharp flicks of her wrist, ensuring the expensive wine kept flowing. I watched her pour the vintage Cabernet, pointedly skipping my empty glass. I took my seat near the foot of the long mahogany table, pulling my sleeves down to conceal the bandages. At the head of the table, Richard pushed his chair back. The wood scraped sharply against the floorboards. He picked up a silver butter knife and tapped it against his crystal flute. The sharp, ringing sound commanded the room into silence. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. The sharp ringing of silver against crystal reverberated through the expansive dining room. The ambient chatter of 20 wealthy guests instantly dissolved into an obedient silence. At the head of the long mahogany table, my father lowered his butter knife. He stood tall, adjusting the lapels of his bespoke charcoal suit. The warm glow of the overhead chandelier caught the silver at his temples, giving him the distinguished appearance of a seasoned patriarch. He looked exactly like the self-made titan of industry he constantly claimed to be. I sat near the far end of the table, nursing the throbbing burn beneath my long sleeve. My gaze remained fixed on the centerpiece, a lavish arrangement of autumn foliage and white roses. My pulse drummed a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "I want to welcome everyone to our home," Richard began, his voice projecting with practiced theatricality. "We are gathered here to celebrate abundance. We are surrounded by dear friends, esteemed colleagues, and soon-to-be family." He gestured gracefully toward Preston and his parents. Preston sat up straighter, absorbing the validation. Savannah beamed, her manicured hand resting possessively on Preston's forearm. "When I purchased this estate," Richard continued, weaving a masterful tapestry of absolute lies, "and when I founded our marketing firm 3 decades ago, I possessed nothing but a vision and an unrelenting work ethic. I built an empire from the ground up. I sacrificed sleep, comfort, and youth to ensure my legacy would stand the test of time." I listened to him rewrite history in real time. He did not purchase this estate. He did not found the firm. He merely married the brilliant woman who did. But in his mind, my biological mother was just a footnote. Her genius was entirely erased, replaced by his towering, fragile ego. "A legacy is only as strong as the generation inheriting it," my father proclaimed, his tone shifting into a serious, corporate cadence. "It requires a specific caliber of intellect to manage complex wealth. It demands vision, social grace, and an innate understanding of modern branding." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the captive audience. Valerie looked up at him with unblinking adoration. "Therefore, I have decided to officially step down from the daily operations of the firm," Richard announced. The guests murmured in polite surprise. "Effective immediately, I have successfully restructured our corporate and private holdings. I am transferring absolute executive control, the voting shares of the company, the deed to this property, and all offshore holding accounts solely into the name of my youngest daughter, Savannah." A collective gasp of delight rippled through the room. Preston's father offered a robust nod of approval, clearly thrilled by the massive influx of capital merging into his son's future. Valerie clapped her hands together, a picture of maternal pride. Savannah let out a high-pitched squeal, bringing her hands to her face in mock astonishment, though she had known about the plan all along. I did not clap. I did not gasp. My right hand slipped silently into the pocket of my blazer. My fingertips brushed against the smooth metallic casing of the recording device Harper Davis had provided. I found the textured ridge near the top. I applied downward pressure. A microscopic, silent click registered against my thumb. The device was active. The digital trap was armed. Now I needed the confession. The applause began to die down. Richard raised his glass to propose the final toast. "What about my share?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the lingering celebratory noise like a shattered pane of glass. The entire table went dead silent. The sudden absence of sound was suffocating. Fork tines hovered mid-air. Wine glasses paused inches from parted lips. 20 pairs of eyes snapped toward my end of the mahogany table. Preston furrowed his brow, looking at me as if a piece of the furniture had suddenly started speaking. Preston's mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clutching her pearl necklace. Valerie's warm, maternal expression instantly hardened into a mask of pure, venomous outrage. She shot me a glare so intensely hateful, it could have stripped paint from the walls. I kept my posture perfectly straight. I did not shrink under the collective weight of their stares. I looked directly down the length of the table, locking eyes with the man claiming to be a self-made king. "Mom started that company," I stated calmly, ensuring my words were loud enough for the hidden microphone to register every syllable. "She built the client list. She bought this house. You are just the executor of her estate. So I will ask you again, what happens to my share of my mother's legacy?" Savannah let out a soft, mocking scoff. She picked up her crystal flute, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her sparkling wine. She looked at me over the rim of the glass, her eyes dancing with wicked amusement. She clearly thought I was having a pathetic, desperate mental breakdown. Richard did not look amused. His face flushed a deep, furious shade of crimson. The vein near his temple throbbed visibly against his skin. I had just challenged his authority, insulted his entire fabricated origin story, and demanded accountability in front of the very billionaires he was desperately trying to impress. Harper Davis was right. Narcissistic men cannot handle being challenged in front of an audience. They cannot simply ignore a perceived slight. They must crush the opposition. They must assert total dominance. Richard slowly lowered his wineglass to the table. He did not laugh off my comment. He did not pretend I was confused. He adjusted his expensive silk tie with terrifying precision. He planted both hands firmly on the table and leaned forward, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow down the polished wood. He looked me dead in the eyes. "Your mother is dead," Richard sneered. His voice was low, vibrating with a raw, unfiltered hatred he had clearly harbored for decades. The words hit the silent room like physical blows. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared intervene. "I built this empire," he continued, his tone turning razor sharp, slicing through any remaining illusion of paternal warmth. Elise was weak. She left a disorganized mess, and I spent 25 years turning it into a fortress. I multiplied those assets. I secured the international accounts. Everything this family possesses exists because of my intellect and my execution. He took a slow breath, relishing the power dynamic. He was delivering the verbal kill shot he had been holding back for my entire adult life. "You are a mediocre accountant, Juliet," he stated, pronouncing my name like a disease. "You possess absolutely zero vision. You do not have the mind for wealth. You lack the ruthlessness required to manage a corporate dynasty. Handing you those assets would be a catastrophic waste of capital." I took the necessary legal steps to ensure my life's work goes to a daughter who actually understands its value. He pointed a harsh, accusing finger down the length of the table. "You are just an employee allowed to balance the books," he finalized, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Do not ever speak of her legacy again. You were never really part of this family anyway." The brutal finality of his statement hung heavily in the dining room air. Savannah smirked, swirling the remaining wine in her glass. Valerie offered a smug, satisfied nod, pleased that the parasite had finally been put in her place. Preston looked away, mildly embarrassed by the family drama, but clearly relieved his future wife was keeping the money. They expected me to break. They expected tears, a dramatic exit, or a screaming match. They wanted me to shatter so they could justify their cruelty, labeling me as hysterical and unstable. I did not cry. My expression remained entirely blank. Beneath the table, inside the dark pocket of my blazer, the small green light of the recording pen blinked silently. It captured the admission of unauthorized corporate restructuring. It captured the deliberate exclusion of the rightful heir. It captured the malicious intent to bypass an irrevocable trust. Richard had just confessed to multiple federal financial crimes in front of 20 wealthy witnesses, and he recorded the entire confession in his own arrogant, booming voice. I looked at my father's furious, triumphant face. I looked at Savannah's arrogant smirk. I looked at the beautiful dining room that rightfully belonged to me. A profound, chilling sense of peace washed over my mind. I slowly pushed my chair back from the table. The wooden legs scraped softly against the floor. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I did not utter another word. I turned my back on the silent, staring guests and walked steadily toward the grand foyer. The trap was fully loaded. Now, I just had to wait for the timer to expire. The silence in the dining room was dense, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. Richard stood at the head of the table, his chest expanded, his chin tilted upward in a posture of total supremacy. He waited for the inevitable breakdown. He expected my lower lip to tremble. He anticipated a desperate, pathetic plea for his affection. Valerie leaned slightly forward in her chair, her eyes glittering with predatory anticipation, ready to savor my humiliation. Instead of shattering, I simply nodded. It was a single, slow inclination of my head. It was an acknowledgement not of his power, but of his confession. The lack of a hysterical reaction caused a visible ripple of unease to pass over my father's features. The triumphant sneer froze on his lips. He blinked, clearly unnerved by my profound calm. Valerie's satisfied expression curdled into deep irritation. She despised nothing more than being denied a spectacle. I looked down at my assigned place setting. My plate was pristine, untouched. A generous portion of roasted turkey and a dollop of cranberry glaze sat cooling rapidly on the expensive china. I carefully placed my linen napkin on the table. I pushed my heavy wooden chair back, the legs sliding smoothly over the expensive Persian rug. I turned my back on the patriarch of the Silas family and began to walk. I did not run. I did not storm out in a flurry of dramatic outrage. My strides were measured, steady, and terrifyingly deliberate. I felt 20 pairs of eyes burning into my spine, but their stares held no weight anymore. They were looking at a ghost, but I was the only person in the room who knew the house was haunted by its rightful owner. I moved out of the formal dining room and stepped into the grand foyer. The cathedral ceiling soared above me, anchored by a cascading crystal chandelier. I paused for a fraction of a second, my eyes tracing the elegant, sweeping curve of the main staircase. My biological mother chose that exact banister. She selected the imported marble tiles beneath my feet. Richard had spent decades trying to erase her existence, painting over her memory with Valerie's ostentatious decor. But the foundation belonged to Elise, and by extension, it belonged to me. I reached the heavy oak front door. My faded canvas tote bag and thin winter coat rested on a side chair, banished away from the guests' luxurious cashmere wraps. I slid my arms into my coat, grabbed the brass handle of the door, and pulled it open. The freezing November wind hit my face the instant I stepped onto the expansive front porch. The biting cold was a sharp, brilliant contrast to the suffocating, perfumed heat of the dining room. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after spending a lifetime trapped underwater. I pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. The solid click of the deadbolt engaging severed the connection between my past and my future. I walked down the wide stone steps and stopped on the gravel driveway. I turned around to face the multi-million-dollar estate. The sprawling brick structure loomed against the dark night sky. Warm golden light spilled from the large bay windows. I could see the faint moving silhouettes of the dinner guests inside, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were dining inside a ticking legal time bomb. I reached my right hand deep into the inner pocket of my blazer. My numb fingers brushed against the smooth, metallic casing of the recording pen. I pulled it out into the frigid night air. The microscopic green light was dark. The device had successfully powered down, saving the encrypted audio file to its internal memory. I held the cold metal instrument in the palm of my hand. It was the size of a standard writing tool, yet it possessed enough destructive power to level a financial empire. It held the undeniable proof of a deliberate, calculated scheme to defraud a designated heir. It held the sound of Richard digging his own federal grave. A strange sensation began to bubble in the back of my throat. It started as a low, quiet sound, a breathy chuckle born from the sheer, staggering absurdity of the situation. My father, a man who prided himself on his unmatched corporate intellect, had just delivered a pristine, unprompted confession into a hidden microphone. The chuckle grew louder, transforming into a full, resonant laugh. The sound echoed across the empty driveway, harsh and bright against the winter wind. I tilted my head back, looking up at the starless sky, laughing until my ribs ached. Then, the adrenaline began to recede. The physical reality of the burn on my arm and the emotional toll of the evening collided. The laughter fractured. My breath hitched. A hot tear slipped down my freezing cheek. The laugh turned into a deep, guttural sob. It was not a sound of sorrow, nor was it a sound of defeat. It was a sob of pure, unadulterated, cathartic release. For 27 years, I had carried the crushing weight of their disdain. I had internalized the belief that I was a mediocre burden, an unwanted remnant of a forgotten marriage. In that single moment on the gravel driveway, the weight vanished. The invisible chains shattered. I was finally, irrevocably free. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, taking one last look at the glowing estate. I walked to my rusted sedan hidden behind the cedar hedges. I climbed inside, the worn leather seats freezing against my legs. I turned the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, disrupting the quiet suburban neighborhood. I shifted the car into drive and steered away from the property. I knew with profound certainty that the next time I crossed that threshold, I would not be entering as an employee. I would be returning with a locksmith. The drive back to my cramped studio apartment passed in a blur of hyper-focused planning. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my scratched laminate table, nursing the blistered burn on my forearm while waiting for the sun to rise. Friday morning brought a dull, gray sky. I plugged the recording pen into the USB port of my laptop. GK audio file appeared on the screen. I put on a pair of cheap headphones and pressed play. Richard's voice filled my ears, crisp and devastatingly clear. Your mother is dead. I built this empire. You were never really part of this family anyway. I extracted the file, encrypted the data, and attached it to a secure email addressed to Harper Davis. I typed a brief message confirming the acquisition of the target asset. I pressed send. Harper replied less than 3 minutes later. Her response consisted of 4 simple words. The trap is armed. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long, steady breath. The legal machinery was now in motion. Harper would begin drafting the cease and desist orders, the notices of trust execution, and the formal fraud complaints. The countdown to my 28th birthday in December had officially begun. I picked up my smartphone to check the time. A notification badge hovered over a social media application. Out of sheer habit, I tapped the icon. The algorithm immediately pushed a new post to the top of my feed. It was a fresh update from Savannah. I stared at the image loading on my screen. Savannah and Preston were standing inside the plush, glass-walled office of a highly exclusive downtown commercial bank. They were clinking crystal glasses filled with champagne, posing next to a senior loan officer. Savannah wore a designer white suit, her engagement ring flashing under the bright office lights. I read the caption beneath the photograph. Securing the future with my amazing fiancé, Savannah wrote, decorating the text with a string of celebratory emojis. We just leveraged my new executive assets to secure funding for the ultimate dream wedding. A $250,000 destination celebration in the Amalfi Coast is officially locked in. Cheers to building our own empire. My blood ran ice cold, then instantly burned with a horrifying, thrilling realization. I scrutinized the photograph, zooming in on the thick stack of financial documents resting on the banker's desk. Savannah had taken Richard's Thanksgiving announcement as legally binding fact. She genuinely believed she now owned the $4 million estate and the marketing firm. More importantly, she had just used those forged, stolen assets as collateral to secure a staggering personal loan. She had borrowed $250,000 from a major financial institution to pay for luxury wedding vendors, chartered flights, and oceanfront villas. But Savannah did not own a single brick of that house. She did not own a single share of that company. The deeds Richard filed were fraudulent. Once Harper Davis dropped the legal hammer and the trust automatically reverted to my name, the bank would immediately realize their collateral did not exist. The loan would instantly transform from a secured mortgage line into unsecured, high-interest personal debt. And because Savannah's signature was on those specific bank documents, she would be solely, personally liable for every single penny. My younger sister, a spoiled influencer who had never worked a day in her life, a woman who complained about ruining the aesthetic of a kitchen while I suffered third-degree burns, was unknowingly digging her own financial grave. She was building a catastrophic debt foundation based entirely on a felony forgery. I set my phone down on the scratched laminate table. The brilliant, poetic justice of the situation washed over me. Richard's arrogance had not just doomed his own future, it had actively destroyed the golden child he fought so hard to protect. The 3 weeks of silence leading up to my birthday were going to be agonizing, but watching them finance their own destruction would be worth every single second. For 21 days, I ceased to exist. I did not send a single text message. I did not make a single phone call. I blocked their numbers from my personal cell phone. In any normal family, a sudden disappearance after a dramatic holiday exit would trigger a panic. Police would be contacted, hospitals would be checked. But the Silas household operated under a different set of rules. To Richard and Valerie, my absence was not a cause for alarm. It was a profound victory. They assumed I had finally accepted my role as the defeated outcast. They thought my quiet departure from the Thanksgiving table was the ultimate surrender. For my entire life, I had been the daughter who apologized. If Richard ignored my birthday, I apologized for being born during a busy fiscal quarter. If Valerie mocked my clothing, I apologized for lacking high-end fashion sense. I spent decades trying to earn a seat at a table where the chairs were bolted to the floor. My silence over those 3 weeks was the loudest action I had ever taken, but their hubris was deafening. They were too busy celebrating their perceived triumph to notice the predator circling their camp. Behind the scenes, Richard moved with the reckless speed of a man who believed he was untouchable. He took the forged property transfer deed and the fraudulent corporate restructuring documents directly to the county clerk. He formally filed the paperwork to transfer the $4 million estate and the marketing firm into Savannah's newly formed holding company. He thought he was outsmarting an irrevocable trust. He thought the legal system was merely a tool for the wealthy to manipulate. He had no idea Harper Davis was already inside the machine. Harper did not stop him from filing the documents. A lesser attorney would have filed an EDK injunction halting the transfer. Harper wanted the criminal charge to stick. She let Richard commit the felony on the public record. The moment his expensive lawyers filed the forged deeds, Harper filed a sealed counterclaim with the estate courts. She handed the audio recording of his Thanksgiving confession directly to the white-collar crime division of the district attorney. She placed a quiet legal hold on the assets, ensuring that while Richard thought the transfer was successful, the actual underlying equity remained frozen. The trap was intricately constructed. While Richard dug the legal grave, Savannah gleefully jumped into the financial abyss. I watched her self-destruction unfold entirely through her public social media profiles. The $250,000 bank loan cleared her accounts by the first week of December. She immediately marched into a luxury European auto dealership. She posted a photograph sitting on the hood of a brand new chalk gray Porsche Cayenne. The caption boasted about treating herself for her recent promotion to Chief Executive Officer. The car was only the beginning. Savannah flew to Italy for a long weekend to scout wedding venues. She posted videos touring a historic cliffside villa in Positano. She tagged high-end floral designers, luxury caterers, and custom dressmakers. She was putting down non-refundable $50,000 deposits using the borrowed cash. She was signing vendor contracts that held her personally liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in future payments. Every single purchase was secured against the collateral of a house she did not own and a company she did not control. I watched her convert a stolen legacy into an inescapable mountain of high-interest, unsecured debt. On the second Tuesday of December, I sat at my scratched laminate table, drinking black coffee. A notification chimed on my laptop. It was an email from Richard, sent from his secure corporate account. The subject line simply read, "Employment status." I opened the message. It consisted of 2 sentences. The text was drafted in a cold corporate font. It stated my services as a junior accountant were terminated, effective immediately. The second line was the ultimate insult. He wrote that my presence was no longer required for the family future. There was no severance package offered. There was no thank you for the years of unpaid overtime. There was just a sterile dismissal from a father discarding his child. A month ago, that email would have crushed my spirit. It would have sent me spiraling into a panic over my past due student loans and my upcoming rent payment. Today, I did not feel an ounce of fear. I felt a profound, soaring sense of vindication. I connected my laptop to my cheap desktop printer. The machine whirred to life, spitting out a crisp black and white copy of the termination letter. I took a 3-hole punch, aligned the paper, and snapped it into the thick physical evidence binder Harper had instructed me to keep. I smoothed my hand over the page and smiled. He had just fired the legal owner of the company. The calendar pages turned. The middle of December finally arrived. My 28th birthday dawned crisp and clear. I woke up at exactly midnight. I lay in my narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling of my cramped studio apartment. I did not throw a party. I did not buy a cake. I did not need a celebration. The mere passage of time was the greatest gift I could ever receive. At the exact stroke of midnight, the legal clauses written by my biological mother activated. The executor control Richard had wielded like a weapon for over 2 decades dissolved into dust. The transition of power required no grand ceremony. It required no physical handover of keys. By the strict, unyielding letter of the law, the irrevocable trust was now fully vested. The $4 million estate belonged to me. The marketing firm belonged to me. The offshore routing accounts, the commercial real estate, the very desk Richard sat behind every morning shifted into my sole possession. I was no longer a struggling accountant drowning in debt. I was the architect of my own empire. The sun rose over the city, casting bright winter light through my window. At 9 o'clock sharp, my cell phone rang. The caller identification displayed the private number for Harper Davis. I answered the call on the first ring. The line was quiet for a brief moment before her sharp, measured voice came through the speaker. She did not offer birthday greetings. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She delivered the exact words I had been waiting 3 agonizing weeks to hear. "The legal filings are complete," Juliet Harper stated. "The district attorney has reviewed the audio confession. The fraudulent deeds have been officially flagged, and the trust execution documents are finalized. The trap is ready to snap shut." I stood up from my chair, looking out over the busy city streets below. I asked her what the next step was. Harper let out a low, satisfied breath. "It is time," she said. "The envelope is out for delivery." The digital clock on my cellular device shifted to 9:58 in the morning. I sat in a secluded corner booth of an independent coffee shop located on the opposite side of the city. The small room smelled of roasted dark cocoa and toasted sourdough bread. Frost gathered along the edges of the window panes, blurring the frantic movement of pedestrians rushing down the wintry sidewalks. The hiss of the espresso machine provided a steady, comforting rhythm. I held a chipped ceramic mug in my hands, letting the heat seep into my cold palms. My eyes remained fixed on the glowing screen resting on the scratched wooden table. I was monitoring a highly secure tracking portal linked directly to a private bonded courier service. A bright green progress line stretched horizontally across the display. The status read, "Out for delivery." The package, currently traveling toward my $4 million estate, was not a standard parcel. It was a thick, heavy manila envelope bearing the silver embossed seal of Harper Davis and Associates. It required a direct signature upon receipt. The courier could not simply leave it on the porch. He had strict instructions to hand it directly to an adult resident of the household. Inside that pristine brown folder rested a lethal combination of legal weaponry. Harper did not send polite warnings or requests for mediation. She drafted corporate executions. I knew every single page hidden inside that envelope by heart. The first document was a formal cease and desist order. It demanded Richard cease all operations, transactions, and communications on behalf of the marketing firm. It formally stripped him of his assumed executive title. It froze his access to the corporate bank accounts, the payroll systems, and the client databases. If he attempted to sign a single company check after reading that page, he would be committing wire fraud. The second document was the Notice of Immediate Trust Execution. This was the true death blow to his ego. The paperwork legally confirmed that my 28th birthday had passed. The executor clause was officially dissolved. The paper declared Juliette Silas the sole uncontested owner of the property, the liquid assets, and the offshore routing accounts. It meant Richard and Valerie were no longer the master and mistress of a grand estate. They were unauthorized squatters residing in my house. The third document was a certified copy of the original, unedited, irrevocable trust drafted by my late mother. Elise had left clear, undeniable instructions protecting her legacy. I wanted Richard to see her signature. I wanted him to hold the physical proof of his own failure. I needed him to understand that his decades of manipulation had crumbled beneath the brilliant foresight of the wife he spent 30 years trying to erase. The fourth and final item was a notice of intent to pursue federal fraud charges. Harper attached crystal-clear photocopies of the forged property transfer deeds. She included a transcript excerpt of the audio recording from Thanksgiving dinner. The text highlighted his spoken admission regarding the deliberate diversion of my inheritance. The document outlined the specific criminal statutes he had violated. It carried the undeniable threat of federal prison. The digital clock rolled over to 10 in the morning. I pictured the scene unfolding miles away. Valerie rarely woke before 9. She favored slow, luxurious mornings. She would be wearing her expensive silk robe, drinking a pressed green juice in the chef kitchen. She loved answering the heavy oak front door for deliveries, always assuming the packages contained her latest designer purchases or expensive catered goods. The tracking page on my phone refreshed automatically. The green line jumped to the end of the tracker. The status updated in bold black text. Delivered. Signed by V. Silas. I exhaled a long, slow breath. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for 27 years began to evaporate. The strike was successful. The bomb was inside the fortress. I lifted the chipped ceramic mug and took a deep, satisfying sip of my black coffee. The bitter, dark liquid tasted sweeter than any vintage wine Valerie had ever poured. The barista, a young woman wearing a faded denim apron, walked over to wipe down the empty table next to my booth. She paused, tossing her cleaning cloth over her shoulder. She offered a tired, polite smile. "How is your day going so far?" the barista asked, making casual small talk to break the quiet atmosphere of the shop. I lowered my mug. I looked at the tracking confirmation glowing on my screen. I thought about Savannah discovering her upcoming wedding was funded by phantom money. I thought about Richard realizing his stolen empire was gone. I looked back up at the young woman. "Honestly," I replied, offering a warm, genuine smile, "it is the best day of my life." The barista chuckled, wishing me a good weekend, before returning to her station behind the pastry display. I turned my attention back to the cellular device. Now the psychological warfare began. I needed to wait for the shockwave to detonate. 14 minutes passed. I sat in the corner booth tracking the timeline in my head. 14 minutes was the exact amount of time required for Valerie to open the heavy envelope, scan the dense legal header, and realize she was looking at a lawsuit. She would panic. She would run down the hallway screaming for her husband. Richard would snatch the papers from her trembling hands. He would read the cease and desist order. He would see the copy of the forged deed. He would read the transcript of his own voice betraying him. The arrogant facade would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. He would understand that the quiet, obedient daughter he mocked at Thanksgiving had secretly engineered his total destruction. At exactly 10:15, my phone screen illuminated. The device vibrated harshly against the scratched wooden table, creating a low buzzing sound. The caller identification displayed a name, Richard Silas. I did not reach for the phone. I just sat back against the vinyl booth and watched the screen flash. It rang once. It rang twice. The vibration traveled through the wood into my fingertips. I let it ring until the call rolled over to the automated voicemail system. 10 seconds later, the screen lit up again. Richard Silas calling. The panic was setting in. He was realizing his corporate email was likely already locked out by Harper. He was realizing his bank accounts were frozen. He needed to control the narrative. He needed to scream at me, threaten me, and force me back into submission. But he could not reach me. I was a ghost. I took another slow sip of my coffee, watching the missed call notifications stack up on the display screen. The phone stopped ringing and instantly pinged with a text message. "Answer your phone right now, Juliet," the first message read. The tone was sharp and demanding. A second message arrived immediately after. "What is this garbage your lawyer sent to my house? You are making a terrible mistake." A third message popped up. "This is a clerical error. Call me back immediately so we can fix this misunderstanding." I smiled at the predictable strategy. Harper had warned me he would attempt to label his felony forgery as a simple administrative mistake. He was playing right into her psychological profile. The phone began to ring again. I let it buzz against the table. The frantic energy radiating from the small device was palpable. By the time I finished the last drop of my black coffee, the screen was a chaotic waterfall of digital desperation. I checked the notification center. I had accumulated 47 missed calls. The text messages had evolved from arrogant demands into terrified pleas. There were 15 messages in total. The final text arrived just as I stood up to leave the coffee shop. "Please pick up the phone," Richard wrote. "We need to talk about Savannah. She is hyperventilating." The empire had officially collapsed. The shift in power was complete. I picked up my phone, slipped it into my coat pocket, and walked out into the crisp winter air, ready to face the ruins. The crisp winter air burned my lungs as I walked back to my cramped studio apartment. My cellular device remained clutched inside my coat pocket. It vibrated with a relentless, frantic energy. The persistent buzzing felt like a captured insect attempting to escape its confines. Richard was calling again. He was trapped inside a nightmare of his own creation, and he desperately needed his favorite victim to answer the phone so he could regain his illusion of control. I unlocked the heavy wooden door of my apartment building and climbed the 3 flights of narrow stairs. The faded hallway carpet muffled my footsteps. I entered my small living space and locked the deadbolt behind me. The room was cold. The rattling window unit did little to keep the December chill at bay. I walked over to the scratched laminate table and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the dim room. I navigated to the encrypted folder containing the audio file. I maximized the volume on my computer speakers. My phone lit up once more. It was the 48th consecutive phone call. I slid my thumb across the glowing green icon to accept the connection. I lifted the device to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not offer a single greeting. "Juliet!" Richard roared through the small speaker. His voice lacked its usual polished corporate authority. It sounded ragged, breathless, and unhinged. He was hyperventilating. I could hear the sharp, erratic intake of oxygen whistling through his teeth. The calm, calculated patriarch had vanished entirely. "Are you out of your mind?" he screamed, the volume forcing me to hold the phone a few inches away from my ear. You hire some lunatic attorney to send a stack of fake legal threats to my house. Do you have any idea what you have done? I will destroy you in court. I will bankrupt that hack lawyer of yours. I will tie you up in civil litigation for the next 20 years until you are living on the street." I remained perfectly silent. I let him rage. Richard always relied on verbal intimidation to win his boardroom battles. He built his false reputation by overpowering his opponents with sheer volume and relentless aggression. Whenever a vendor challenged his pricing or a client questioned his methods, he would raise his voice and threaten ruin. He expected the person on the other side of the desk to shrink away in fear. He was applying his standard negotiation tactic to his own daughter. When the screaming failed to elicit a response from me, his strategy shifted. The booming threats dissolved into a rapid, frantic attempt at gaslighting. "You are confused," Richard insisted, his tone adopting a sickening, patronizing rhythm. "You read an outdated draft of the paperwork. Elise amended that trust agreement years ago. She authorized the restructuring before she passed. You are holding on to voided documents, Juliet." It was a staggering lie. My biological mother spent the final 3 weeks of her life in a medically induced coma. She lacked the physical capacity to amend a grocery list, let alone a complex, irrevocable trust. He was inventing a fictional legal history in real time, hoping I was ignorant enough to believe him. "And that deed transfer," Richard continued his words, stumbling over one another in a rush to build an alibi, "that was a simple clerical oversight. My paralegal team filed the wrong template with the county clerk. It is an administrative mistake. It means nothing. You are trying to steal my company over a filing error. Savannah is upstairs having a panic attack right now because of your vindictive jealousy." He was blaming the junior staff. Harper Davis had predicted his exact defense down to the specific phrasing. He was a coward pushing the consequences of his felony forgery onto an unnamed paralegal. He genuinely believed he could talk his way out of a federal crime by treating me like an incompetent subordinate. He thought if he spoke fast enough, the glaring holes in his story would simply disappear. Richard paused to draw a heavy, ragged breath. He waited for me to apologize. He waited for me to fold under the pressure of his status. I lowered the cellular phone from my ear. I placed it gently on the scratched laminate table, resting it directly next to the laptop speakers. I pressed the speakerphone button, ensuring the audio connection was crystal clear. I reached out and pressed the spacebar on my computer keyboard. The digital audio file began to play. The recording possessed pristine clarity. The ambient sounds of clinking crystal and polite dinner conversation faded into the background. Then the undeniable booming voice of Richard Silas echoed through my small apartment and traveled directly through the phone line back to the man who spoke the words. "Your mother is dead," the recorded voice stated. "I built this empire. Elise was weak. She left a disorganized mess, and I spent 25 years turning it into a fortress." I stared at the phone, watching the call duration timer tick upward. I did not stop the playback. "You are a mediocre accountant, Juliet," the recording continued, capturing every ounce of his holiday cruelty. "You possess zero vision. You do not have the mind for wealth. Handing you those assets would be a catastrophic waste of capital. I took the necessary legal steps to ensure my life work goes to a daughter who actually understands its value." The final sentence hit the air like a physical execution. "You were never really part of this family anyway." I pressed the spacebar again, stopping the playback. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The telephone line went terrifyingly dead. The sudden absence of Richard's screaming felt heavier than any noise he could have produced. He had just heard his own unprompted confession played back to him. He heard himself admit to taking the necessary legal steps to bypass the rightful heir. The brilliant alibi regarding a paralegal making a clerical error evaporated into thin air. The fictional story about my mother amending the trust burned to the ground. He realized in that exact moment that I possessed the ultimate, irrefutable proof of his intent to commit federal fraud. I leaned closer to the phone. I listened intently to the quiet static of the open connection. Behind the dead silence, I detected a faint, disturbing sound. It was a high-pitched, rapid wheezing. Someone was struggling to draw air into their lungs. Valerie was hyperventilating in the background. My stepmother, the woman who proudly excluded me from every holiday toast and paraded my mother's jewelry around like a trophy, was experiencing a genuine medical panic. The reality of losing her stolen mansion and facing criminal accessory charges had finally broken through her pristine facade. She was grasping the terrifying truth that her entire social standing was about to be obliterated. "Richard," I said quietly, breaking the long silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable. It was no longer the booming command of a chief executive officer. It was the hollow, fragile whisper of a terrified old man facing ruin. "Juliet, please," Richard begged. His tone, stripped of all arrogance, carried a desperate, pleading quality. "Please do not do this. We can fix this. We are family. Come to the firm right now. We will sit down in my office. We will work this out as a family. I will give you whatever you want." He was trying to lure me back into his territory. He wanted me sitting in his expensive leather chairs surrounded by his authority so he could manipulate a settlement behind closed doors. He thought offering me a minor concession would make the criminal evidence disappear. He still believed he could buy his way out of a corner. I picked the phone up from the table. I held it close to my mouth. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I only felt the cold, precise edge of justice. "I was never a part of your family, Richard," I replied, throwing his own venomous words right back into his chest. I took a slow breath, letting the reality of his situation sink deeply into his mind. "Meet me at the Harper Davis law firm tomorrow at exactly noon," I instructed, my voice steady and unyielding. "Bring your lawyers. If you are 1 minute late, or if you try to stall, I will send the audio files and the forged deeds directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." I did not wait for his response. I tapped the red icon on the screen and disconnected the call. The line went silent. The confrontation was over. The shift in power was complete, and tomorrow, the true reckoning would begin. The glass walls of the downtown conference room offered no place to hide. The midday sun poured through the tall windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany table. I sat beside my attorney, waiting in perfect silence. At exactly noon, the heavy double doors swung open. Richard led the procession, but his posture was unrecognizable. The broad-shouldered titan of industry had withered. His custom-tailored suit seemed too large, hanging loosely off his frame. Valerie walked 2 steps behind him, her usual haughty demeanor replaced by a rigid, brittle tension. Savannah followed, clinging tightly to the arm of her fiancé, Preston. Preston wore a crisp navy blazer, his chin tilted upward, projecting an aura of immense boredom. He had clearly insisted on attending to protect his future financial interests, assuming this was a minor nuisance initiated by a jealous sibling. He planned to squash my rebellion and secure his upcoming inheritance. A nervous-looking man carrying a scuffed leather briefcase trailed the family. He was the private corporate counsel for the Silas marketing firm. The man took one look at Harper Davis sitting at the head of the table, and all the color drained from his face. He knew he was walking into a slaughterhouse. Everyone took their seats. No one offered a handshake. No one exchanged greetings. The air was thick and suffocating. Harper did not bother with opening remarks. She reached into her pristine leather portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the smooth wood toward the opposing counsel. Harper stated for the record that the district attorney was currently reviewing the digital audio file captured on Thanksgiving. She detailed the exact timeline of the confession. Richard flinched as if struck by a physical blow. His lawyer scanned the transcript excerpt, his eyes widening with every passing second. The defense attorney closed his briefcase, pushing it slightly away from himself. It was a subconscious gesture, distancing his career from his client and the sinking ship he captained. Harper produced the property transfer deed and the corporate restructuring documents. She placed the original irrevocable trust drafted by my biological mother right next to them. She pointed to the signature lines. Harper spoke in a steady, chilling monotone. She declared the restructuring void. She informed the room that the county clerk had already received the injunction. The marketing firm, the offshore accounts, the commercial real estate, and the suburban mansion were now legally registered solely under the name Juliet Silas. Valerie pressed a manicured hand over her mouth, stifling a quiet gasp. She looked around the glass walls, realizing her entire social existence was vaporizing. She no longer owned a mansion to host her lavish brunches. She was a tenant at the mercy of the stepdaughter she had spent decades tormenting. The luxury cars, the country club memberships, the designer clothes were all funded by a company she had zero legal claim to access. I turned my attention to Savannah. The harsh fluorescent lighting embedded in the ceiling stripped away her curated influencer aesthetic. Her expensive spray tan looked sickly and pale, a weird artificial orange hue against her drained complexion. She clutched a white designer leather handbag tightly to her chest, using it as a physical shield against the legal assault. Her eye, he was entirely broken. The illusion of his genius was shattered. He could not yell his way out of a federal forgery charge with pristine audio evidence stacked against him. He was a silent, defeated shell, stripped of his stolen armor. I watched the man who told me I lacked the mind for wealth shrink into a pathetic shadow. Harper was not finished. The apex predator had identified a secondary target. She turned her piercing gaze toward Savannah. Harper pulled a thick financial dossier from her portfolio. It contained printouts of social media posts and copies of public banking ledgers. Harper asked Savannah to confirm her recent visit to a downtown commercial bank. Savannah blinked, her breathing turning shallow. Harper did not wait for an answer. She laid out the brutal financial reality. She explained that Savannah had used the forged deeds as collateral to secure a personal loan of $250,000. The funds were required to finance luxury wedding vendors, chartered flights, and international travel. Harper leaned forward, intertwining her fingers. She explained banking regulations with terrifying clarity. Since the collateral used to secure the loan did not legally belong to the borrower, the financial institution would immediately flag the transaction. The loan was no longer a secured line of credit. It was unsecured personal debt. Furthermore, presenting falsified documents to a federally insured bank constituted a severe form of financial fraud. Savannah was solely legally responsible for $250,000 in high-interest debt. She possessed no income. She held no assets. The luxury car she purchased and the non-refundable deposits she made in Italy were funded by phantom money. She was financially ruined before her 25th birthday. The weight of the numbers hung in the air, pressing down on my sister until she visibly slumped in her expensive chair. Savannah dropped her designer handbag. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Tears spilled over her lower lashes, ruining her precise makeup. She turned to Preston, gripping his tailored sleeve. She begged him to call his father. She pleaded with him to use the Sterling family accounts to pay off the bank and make the problem disappear. She thought wealth was a magic wand that could wave away any consequence. Preston did not reach for his phone. He stared at the crying woman beside him. The truth was washing over his aristocratic features. He had planned to marry an heiress. He envisioned merging his generational wealth with her supposed corporate empire. He thought he was aligning himself with a sprawling estate and a lucrative marketing firm. Instead, he was sitting next to a broke, unemployed fraudster buried under a mountain of federal investigations and unsecured debt. The disgust on Preston's face was palpable. It contorted his expression, stripping away his polished society charm. He realized the Silas family name was about to become toxic in their affluent circles. The scandal would ruin his own social standing. He could not be seen associating with felons and bankrupt influencers. His entire identity relied on pristine public perception, and Savannah was now a glaring liability. Preston slowly reached across with his opposite hand. He peeled Savannah's trembling fingers off his navy blazer, one by one. He treated her touch like a contagious disease. He pushed his heavy leather chair back from the table. The scraping sound echoed loudly in the quiet conference room. He stood up, towering over the ruins of my father-fabricated dynasty. He adjusted his collar, refusing to look down at the sobbing woman who was supposed to be his wife. The ultimate nightmare for a status-obsessed socialite was unfolding right in front of her eyes. The safety net was gone, and the cold, hard ground was rushing up to meet her. Preston Sterling belonged to a family that valued reputation above all else. His ancestors built shipping routes and commercial real estate empires. They survived recessions and market crashes by ruthlessly cutting away liabilities. They did not tolerate public scandals. They did not associate with federal investigations or unsecured debt. Savannah had just transformed from a prized societal asset into a catastrophic financial liability. Preston did not raise his voice. He did not yell or demand an explanation. He simply looked at the weeping woman beside him with eyes devoid of any warmth. He reached for his left hand. His long fingers grasped the heavy platinum band resting on his ring finger. The engagement ring was a Sterling family heirloom featuring a flawless 3-carat diamond. He slid the cold metal over his knuckle. He placed the ring gently onto the polished mahogany table. The sharp clinking sound of the precious metal hitting the wood echoed through the quiet conference room like a judge striking a final gavel. Savannah stared at the glittering diamond resting on the table. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her tear-filled eyes widened in pure terror. Preston turned his back and began walking toward the heavy double doors of the law office. He did not offer a goodbye. He did not cast a single backward glance. He was excising a tumor from his pristine life. Savannah pushed herself up from the expensive leather chair. Her legs trembled uncontrollably beneath her designer skirt. She screamed his name. The sound was raw and guttural, tearing through her vocal cords. She lunged forward, trying to grab the fabric of his tailored navy blazer. Her expensive designer heels caught on the edge of the plush carpet. Preston stepped out of the room and the doors swung shut behind him, sealing her fate. The shock of the sequence overwhelmed her fragile nervous system. In less than 20 minutes, she had lost a $4 million estate, a lucrative marketing firm, a brand new luxury vehicle, an Italian destination wedding, and a billionaire fiancé. Her entire curated influencer identity evaporated into nothingness. The sheer weight of the $250,000 unsecured personal debt crushed the breath from her lungs. Her eyes rolled back into her head. She fainted, collapsing into a heap of expensive white linen and ruined makeup right in the center of the law office floor. Valerie shrieked, dropping to her knees beside her unconscious daughter. Valerie grew up in a working-class neighborhood, always chasing the illusion of high society. She married Richard because he offered her a shortcut to the country club lifestyle. She spent her entire adult life guarding that stolen status, ferociously, viewing me as a constant threat to her acquired wealth. Now she was on her knees on a corporate carpet, watching her entire fabricated universe collapse in real time. The pristine image my stepmother had cultivated for decades dissolved into pathetic chaos. She slapped Savannah lightly on the cheeks, trying to rouse her. Dark streams of ruined mascara carved ugly black trails down Valerie's pale face. She looked up at her husband. Her eyes begged him for salvation. She demanded he fix the situation. She commanded him to call Preston and make a deal. She screamed at him to call the commercial bank and pay off the loan. Valerie still operated under the delusion that Richard possessed the power to manipulate reality. She did not understand the empire was already gone. Richard did not look at his wife. He did not look at his unconscious daughter laying on the floor. He slowly lifted his head and fixed his hollow gaze upon me. Richard was a salesman who possessed a talent for talking a good game, but lacked the actual substance to build anything genuine. He rode my mother's coattails and then spent 25 years trying to convince the world he was the genius behind the curtain. He relied on intimidation to hide his mediocrity. Now the curtain was pulled back, and the wizard was just a terrified fraud. The man who had spent his entire life towering over everyone in his path looked incredibly small. His broad shoulders sagged. The sharp, commanding lines of his face had melted into sagging, terrified folds. He stared at the daughter he had abused, neglected, and discarded for 27 years. He opened his mouth to speak. His voice was a raspy, broken whisper, stripped of all authority and arrogance. "Are you really going to send your own father to prison, Juliet?" Richard asked. The question hung in the bright fluorescent light of the conference room. I looked at the pathetic figure sitting across the table. I thought about the decades of emotional starvation. I remembered the cold Thanksgiving dinners where I was treated like hired help. I recalled the blistering grease burn on my arm and Savannah complaining about the aesthetic of the kitchen while I bled. I pictured the forged signature on the property deed. I remembered the arrogant tone of his voice captured on the hidden recording device, telling me I lacked the mind for wealth. I held every single card in the deck. I possessed the undeniable power to destroy them both criminally and financially. I could command Harper Davis to forward the entire physical evidence binder to the federal authorities. The district attorney would issue arrest warrants before the end of the business day. Richard would face a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and forgery. The media would devour the scandal. The Silas family name would become synonymous with corporate theft. But a prolonged criminal trial meant years of courtroom appearances. It meant enduring endless cross-examinations and constant media scrutiny. It meant keeping Richard and Valerie tied to my life for the next decade while the justice system slowly processed their crimes. I did not want to spend my 30s fighting a broken old man in a federal courthouse. I wanted a clean amputation. I wanted to reclaim my mother legacy and excise these parasites from my existence permanently. Harper sat perfectly still beside me. Her sharp, predatory eyes tracked every micro-expression in the room. She was waiting for my instruction. She was a weapon ready to be fired. She rested her hand on a thick stack of fresh legal documents positioned at the center of the table. These were not the cease and desist notices. These were formal, irrevocable surrender agreements. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool mahogany surface. I looked directly into Richard's defeated eyes. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the calm, chilling precision of a corporate executioner. I told him he had exactly two choices. He could face a federal judge, lose everything in a public spectacle, and spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. He could watch the government seize whatever personal funds he had left to pay restitution and legal fees. He could let Savannah face separate federal charges for presenting fraudulent documents to a commercial bank. Or he could pick up a pen. I demanded he sign over absolute, uncontested control of the marketing firm and the family estate right this very second. I instructed him to formally waive any right to appeal to contest the trust execution or to ever claim a single dime from the corporate accounts. I required him to sign a binding non-disclosure agreement and a permanent restraining order, preventing him and his wife from ever contacting me again. I pointed to the fresh stack of paper resting under Harper's hand. If he signed the surrender agreements, I would lock the audio confession in a secure vault. I would let him walk out of the law office as a free but penniless man. If he hesitated for even a fraction of a second, I would dial the authorities and watch the police place him in handcuffs before he reached the lobby. The room fell deadly silent, save for the sound of Valerie's quiet, desperate sobbing on the floor. Richard stared at the heavy pen resting on top of the legal surrender documents. The trap had fully closed. He had zero leverage and zero time. He had to choose between his freedom and his pride. Richard held the expensive silver pen hovering over the thick stack of legal surrenders resting on the conference room table. His hand shook with a fierce, uncontrollable tremor. The fine tip of the pen tapped against the pristine white paper, leaving tiny, dark ink blots. He looked up at Harper Davis, searching for a fraction of leniency. She offered no sympathy. She simply tapped her manicured index finger against the bottom signature line. Richard pressed the nib to the page. The scratching sound of ink bonding to paper echoed throughout the glass walls of the room. He signed away his false kingdom. He signed away the marketing firm, the offshore routing numbers, the commercial real estate, and the sprawling suburban estate. Every loop of his signature dismantled a piece of his fabricated identity. When he finished the final page, he dropped the pen. It clattered harshly against the mahogany wood. Harper swiftly gathered the documents, placing them securely inside her leather portfolio. The transfer was permanent. The empire belonged to me. I gave them exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises. It was a highly generous time frame, considering the decades of emotional starvation they had inflicted upon me. During those 3 days, Harper executed the financial clawback clauses. She initiated rigorous forensic audits on the personal checking and savings accounts controlled by Richard and Valerie. She identified millions of dollars in embezzled corporate funds, secretly funneled to pay for country club dues, luxury vehicles, and designer wardrobes. Harper secured immediate court orders freezing every single compromised account to ensure restitution for the stolen equity. The sudden freezing of their liquid assets meant my father could not hire a team of professional movers. He could not book an extended suite at a luxury downtown hotel. He could not write a heavy check to solve his problem. On the morning of the eviction, I drove my rusted sedan up the familiar, winding suburban road. The winter sky was a pale, bruised purple, threatening snow. The freezing air bit at the barren branches of the oak trees lining the street. I turned onto the private drive and parked near the grand entrance. A bright orange rental moving truck sat idling on the pristine gravel turnaround. It was a glaring utilitarian stain against the elegant brick facade of the estate. For the first time in his adult life, Richard was performing hard manual labor. He wore a faded gray sweatshirt stained with dark patches of sweat. He was struggling to push a cheap metal dolly loaded with uneven cardboard boxes up the steep metal ramp of the rental truck. His breathing was labored. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. Valerie stood near the open cargo bay, barking frantic, useless directions while refusing to lift a single box herself to protect her expensive manicure. They looked like strangers struggling to survive a disaster they had personally engineered. I walked up the wide stone steps onto the sweeping front porch. A professional locksmith dressed in a thick canvas jacket was already working on the heavy oak front door. He had a specialized drill pressing into the brass deadbolt, extracting the old cylinders to install high-security locks. GK stood beside him, watching the bright metal shavings fall onto the welcome mat. The piercing whine of the drill provided a fitting mechanical soundtrack to the dismantling of my father's reign. A loud clattering noise drew my attention back to the driveway. Savannah emerged from the front door dragging an oversized, hard-shell designer suitcase. The piece of luxury luggage cost more than my entire vehicle. It was designed to glide effortlessly across polished airport floors, not to be dragged across coarse, uneven gravel. Savannah wore oversized dark sunglasses hiding her swollen red eyes. She yanked the heavy trunk down the top step. The suitcase bounced harshly against the stone edge. She hauled it toward the orange rental truck, leaning her entire body weight into the rigid handle. The tiny plastic wheels dug deeply into the thick gravel. Savannah pulled harder, letting out a sharp groan of immense frustration. A loud, sharp cracking sound cut through the cold morning air. One of the reinforced wheels snapped clean off the designer trunk, flying into the frozen grass. The heavy suitcase listed sharply to the right, tearing the handle from her delicate grasp and crashing onto the hard ground. The sudden impact jarred the zipper loose, spilling a cascade of expensive silk blouses and delicate cashmere sweaters directly onto the dirty, wet driveway. Savannah stared at the ruined clothing scattered in the dirt. The last remaining shred of her false, aristocratic composure evaporated. She sank down onto the hard concrete curb, folding her body in half. She buried her face in her hands and began to cry loudly. It was an ugly, raw weeping. Her shoulders heaved, her sobs echoing across the manicured lawn. The $250,000 debt, the lost billionaire fiancé, the frozen bank accounts, and the broken suitcase all culminated in a total psychological collapse. I stood on the elevated porch looking down at the broken woman sitting on the curb. I searched my chest for a flicker of pity. I searched for a twisted desire to mock her pain. I found neither. I only felt a profound, deafening silence. Savannah was a stranger, mourning a life that never truly belonged to her. The burning anger that had fueled my survival for 27 years had extinguished itself, leaving a clean, quiet slate. I watched her weep, realizing I no longer needed their validation or their suffering to feel whole. Valerie noticed me standing on the porch observing the pathetic scene. She dropped a small cardboard box onto the driveway and marched toward the stone GK. Her face was pale and drawn, the skin around her eyes tight with exhausted rage. She climbed the GK, stopping just short of the landing. She looked at the locksmith installing the final brass cylinder into the door frame. She looked at my calm, unbothered expression. The realization that she could no longer intimidate me settled deep into her bones, but she could not resist launching one final psychological strike. Valerie stepped closer, leaning into my personal space. The heavy floral scent of her signature perfume mixed with the sharp metallic smell of drilled brass. She lowered her voice to a harsh, conspiratorial whisper, attempting to disguise her venom as maternal wisdom. "You think you have won, Juliet," Valerie hissed, her eyes narrowing into dark, calculating slits. "You took the money and you took the property, but look around. You are going to be all alone in this big, empty house. You have alienated everyone who ever cared for you. At the end of the day, family is all that matters. You will realize that when the silence drives you crazy." It was the ultimate desperate manipulation. She was trying to weaponize my newfound peace, framing my liberation as a terrible, isolating curse. She wanted me to feel guilty for surviving her cruelty and reclaiming my rightful legacy. She needed me to believe that a toxic family was better than no family at all. I looked at Valerie, examining the bitter, terrified woman standing on my porch. I did not argue with her logic. I did not defend my choices. I simply held out my open palm toward the locksmith. The technician wiped a gleaming new brass key on his canvas trousers and placed the heavy metal object into my hand. My fingers curled around the jagged edges of the key, feeling the cold, solid weight of ownership. I met Valerie's venomous stare. I told her I would rather live in an empty house than share a mansion with thieves. I turned my back on my stepmother, stepping over the threshold into the grand foyer. I grasped the solid brass handle on the inside of the heavy oak door. Valerie opened her mouth to deliver another desperate insult, but the words never materialized. I pulled the heavy door shut directly in her face. The new steel deadbolt engaged with a loud, resounding click, locking her out forever and echoing through the expansive, quiet halls of my new empire. 6 months have passed since that freezing morning on the gravel driveway. I am currently sitting 50 stories above the city skyline. The dark mahogany furniture my father favored is gone. My corner office is now encased in floor-to-ceiling glass, featuring sleek, modern steel accents and minimalist decor. I rebranded the marketing firm during my first week as Chief Executive Officer. The transition of power sent shockwaves through the industry, but the internal staff embraced the change immediately. I purged the bloated executive accounts, stripped away the vanity projects, and applied my rigorous accounting background to the operational budget. I rewarded the loyal employees who had suffered under Richard and his tyrannical management style, implementing fair wages and transparent corporate policies. Within a single financial quarter, our profit margins doubled. The client retention rate soared to record heights. It turns out a mediocre accountant possesses exactly the type of vision required to rebuild a struggling corporate dynasty and steer it into unprecedented prosperity. I no longer live in a sweltering 400-square-foot studio apartment, wondering how I am going to afford my next meal. I reside in a stunning, open-concept penthouse located in the heart of the downtown financial district. The space features towering windows wrapping around the perimeter, offering panoramic views of the bustling metropolis. I did not keep the suburban estate. Some people might have retained the property as a trophy to flaunt their ultimate victory over their abusers. They might have lived in those grand rooms just to prove they had won the war. But walking through those expansive, carpeted hallways only reminded me of the decades I spent shrinking myself to survive. Every room echoed with the phantom sounds of holiday dinners where I was treated like a ghost. I remembered the blistering grease burn on my arm in the chef kitchen and the condescending whispers echoing in the foyer. I hired a premium real estate broker and listed the mansion on the private market. I ordered a professional crew to strip away every trace of Valerie and her ostentatious interior design. The house was staged with clean, modern elegance, and it sold in less than a month to a young family relocating from the West Coast. Handing the keys over to the new owners felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding in my lungs for 27 years. I took the capital from the sale, paid off every single cent of my student loans, and invested the remaining millions directly into the firm, expanding our international reach. As for the remnants of the Silas family, they are experiencing the harsh, unforgiving reality of the world outside their former bubble. Richard and Valerie reside in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. Without access to corporate funds or offshore routing accounts, their extravagant lifestyle evaporated overnight. The luxury vehicles were repossessed. The exclusive country club revoked their membership due to unpaid dues, and the lingering stench of public scandal. Richard attempted to secure a consulting position at rival firms, but news of his federal fraud investigation circulated quickly through the industry. No reputable company would associate their brand with a disgraced executive known for forging documents to steal from his own blood. The men who used to drink his expensive wine and applaud his arrogant toasts refused to return his phone calls. He was forced into early, involuntary retirement. He spends his days sitting in a cramped living room staring at a television screen, while Valerie complains bitterly about clipping coupons and shopping at discount grocery stores. Their marriage, built entirely on a foundation of stolen wealth and superficial status, is crumbling under the weight of their new poverty. Savannah faced an even steeper descent into reality. The commercial bank refused to forgive her $250,000 personal loan. The fraud department relentlessly pursued the debt collection. Without a billionaire fiancé or a stolen inheritance to bail her out, she was forced to enter the actual workforce for the first time in her entire existence. The former luxury influencer now works 40 hours a week as a retail associate at a mid-tier suburban department store. She spends her days folding denim jeans, organizing shoe displays, and restocking clearance racks. She is forced to smile and offer polite customer service to the exact type of everyday people she used to mock on her social media channels. Her wages are heavily garnished to afford the minimum monthly payments on her suffocating debt. Her designer wardrobe was liquidated through online consignment shops just to keep the lights on in her rented studio. I do not reach out to them, and they do not contact me. The silence between us is profound, and it is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. I sit at my expansive glass desk, watching the afternoon sun reflect off the surrounding skyscrapers. The city below hums with vibrant energy. I reach into my leather briefcase and extract a small, polished silver frame. I place it carefully on the pristine glass surface right next to my computer monitor. The photograph inside the frame is old, its colors slightly faded by the passage of time. It shows a brilliant woman with kind eyes, smiling warmly at the camera, my biological mother, Elise. I trace the cool metal edge of the frame with my index finger. For my entire life, I believed I was an unwanted burden. I thought I was navigating a cruel world entirely alone, unloved and unprotected. I believed the narrative my father forced upon me. But looking at her face, I finally feel a deep, unbreakable connection. Elise knew her husband was a predator. She understood the depths of his greed, the limits of his intellect, and the fragility of his ego. She loved me enough to weave an impenetrable legal shield protecting my future from beyond the grave. She anticipated his betrayal, and she left me the perfect weapon to defeat him. She gave me the tools to reclaim my kingdom, and I used them to build a fortress. I want to take a moment to speak directly to anyone watching this video right now. Society places a heavy burden on the concept of biological loyalty. We are taught to forgive endless transgressions simply because we share a bloodline. We are conditioned to believe that maintaining the peace is more important than protecting our own mental, physical, and financial well-being. We are told to turn a blind eye to abuse because walking away from family is considered a failure. But the harsh truth is that toxic environments do not magically heal themselves. You cannot love a narcissist into respecting your boundaries. Sometimes the very people who are supposed to protect you are the exact monsters you need protection from. Your worth is not decided by the people who refuse to see it. Your value is not measured by the empty wine glasses at a holiday table or the cruel comments spoken behind closed doors. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into a space that was never designed to hold your brilliance. You do not have to accept the role of the scapegoat just to keep arrogant people comfortable. Sometimes you just have to let them talk, hit record, and let them destroy themselves. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own future? Have you ever walked away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Drop a comment below and share your story. I read every single one because I know exactly how much courage it takes to walk away and start over. You are not alone in your struggle. If you found strength in my journey, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories of justice and survival coming your way. Thank you for listening, and remember, your legacy belongs entirely to you.
Looking back at the wreckage of the empire I reclaimed, the most profound realization is not about the recovery of a sprawling estate or the acquisition of a lucrative marketing firm, but rather the universal truths exposed when the facade of a perfect bloodline finally crumbles. For those who stand at the head of the dinner table holding the power of parenthood, the overarching lesson is written in the permanent scars carried by the children they choose to overlook. Fairness is not just about assets, but about how you treat your children on a daily basis. Favoring one child, in terms of money, opportunities, or affection, will leave lasting wounds that no amount of delayed apologies or forced family gatherings can ever heal. We learn that profound injustice within the family often permanently breaks relationships, not only between parents and children, but also between siblings who were pitted against each other in a forced competition for basic parental approval. The adults who wield their authority must understand that words carry lasting weight. Statements like, "You don't belong in this family," can cause deep psychological harm, taking root in a young mind and blooming into a quiet, enduring grief that shapes their entire worldview. Furthermore, a single emotional moment, fueled by unchecked ego at a holiday gathering, can destroy years of accumulated trust in the blink of an eye. When it comes to the tangible foundation of a family's legacy, financial and legal transparency is paramount. Decisions regarding assets, house, business, inheritance, need to be clear, legal, and discussed beforehand to prevent the seeds of resentment from taking root. Emotional actions lacking transparency can lead to serious legal consequences that cannot be undone by claiming a clerical error or begging for familial mercy in a sterile conference room. Perhaps the most dangerous miscalculation a parent can make is to underestimate their children. Thinking that a silent child is weak can be a mistake. Today's younger generation understands the law, knows how to protect their rights, and is capable of reacting strongly when treated unfairly by the very people supposed to guide them. The quiet ones sitting at the end of the table are often just observing, taking notes, and waiting for the precise moment GK balance the scales of justice. For the younger generation navigating the treacherous waters of toxic household dynamics, the blueprint for survival begins with staying calm in conflict. The individual doesn't react immediately, but chooses to observe and act strategically, recognizing that true power resides in patience. Controlling emotions helps avoid mistakes and creates long-term advantages that raw anger could never secure. It requires understanding and protecting one's rights. Recording conversations and seeking legal counsel demonstrate the importance of awareness of personal rights. In modern society, legal knowledge is a necessary skill to defend your livelihood against those who view your kindness as a vulnerability to exploit. True liberation, however, is born from financial and emotional independence. Not being completely dependent on family reduces the risk of conflict, allowing you to walk away from a poisoned well without fearing the ensuing desert. Self-reliance gives you a voice and choices that cannot be dictated by someone else's wallet or arbitrary conditions. We must collectively swallow the hard truth that not every family is safe. Modern American culture increasingly recognizes that family can also be a source of harm, masking manipulation behind the guise of blood loyalty and shared last names. Recognizing this reality means understanding that setting boundaries is necessary, even with close relatives who demand your unconditional compliance at the expense of your own mental health. Stepping back to view the broader picture of human connection, we see that respect is the foundation of all relationships. When respect is lost, money or possessions cannot save it. Every choice ripples outward, proving that actions have consequences. A decision made at a dinner can lead to consequences lasting for years, even lawsuits that strip away a lifetime of stolen prestige. No matter how deeply the lies are buried under corporate restructuring or forged documents, the truth always finds a way to be revealed. We live in an era where secrecy is an illusion. In the age of technology, any unfair behavior or abuse of power can be recorded and brought to light. If you have ever sat at a table where your voice was silenced, or if you have ever had to build your own armor to survive the people who were supposed to protect you, you are not alone in this fight. Welcome to a community where the invisible finally become undeniable, where the silent observers rise up to reclaim their stolen narratives. Please subscribe to Sophia Told Stories and drop a comment below sharing your own journey of reclaiming your worth and setting boundaries. Because every survivor deserves an audience that truly understands their struggle. You can spend half your life waiting for the people at the head of the table to pass the plate, hoping that if you are just quiet enough, helpful enough, or successful enough, they will finally look at you and see someone worth loving. Learning to swallow the cold dinners and the sharper insults. Convincing yourself that the ache in your chest is simply the cost of belonging to a legacy. Until one day the crisp winter air hits your face, the heavy door clicks shut behind you, and you realize the table was never yours to sit at. Understanding that the only empire you ever needed to build was the one within yourself, leaving you to gaze into the darkening glass of the window, seeing your reflection in the quiet room, and whispering to the empty air, "This feels so much like me."